and get started. So I'm really glad that you're all here with us today. My name is Elizabeth. I went to Tenko. I'm a librarian at UC Merced. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Eileen Camfield, who's going to be giving our Library Faculty Author Series talk today. The Faculty Author Series showcases the latest research and scholarship by UC Merced faculty members. And if you would like to be featured in a future Faculty Author Series talk, please let me know. That would be awesome. For today, we're thrilled to have Dr. Camfield here with us. Dr. Camfield has a dual appointment and is a teaching professor in the Global Arts, Media, and Writing Studies Department at UC Merced, and is the interim director of the Center for Engaged Teaching and Learning. She has a degree in English and graduate degrees, an MA and EDD in higher education. Since 1997, she's been an instructor, curriculum designer, and faculty pedagogy coordinator. Dr. Camfield has a deep commitment to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion, which connects with her research interests pertaining to student success, writing self-efficacy development, and anti-racist pedagogy, resilience theory, and authentic assessment. And we're so happy to have her here with us today. I'm going to turn this over now to Eileen.
Everyone feeling joyful today? Yeah, good. I saw the hands. You never know these days. You look at the headlines of the newspaper and you just shrink a little and hide it and move on. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to the library for hosting the event. We do have magnets and buttons, I believe, arriving any moment now. Help yourself to a sticker. We are excited to try to be spreading the word about the importance of joy in teaching. My plan today is to talk a little bit about the deep roots of this book. Where did this book come from? The second half of the title of my talk today will become evident to you when I tell you about the deep roots of this book. And then I will move into talking about why joy is important in our classrooms, why it is actually essential in our lives. I shouldn't need to tell anybody that, and yet it seems like I need to tell people that. And people want to hear that, that's for sure. And then I'll spend a little bit of time kind of talking about the focus of the book and some strategies for those of you who are teachers. And maybe those of you who are learners, you can think about how joy can support your learning. So that's my plan. Sound all right? I have to just fully disclose that at the beginning of the talk, we are starting in the opposite of joy. It's a little bit of a bummer, perhaps, but it's important to kind of acknowledge why joy really is a form of resistance. You probably have heard that used in sort of social justice movements. That's not a line that's unique to me, but I think applying it in the context of higher education is significant. So where this book really began is perhaps when I was 18 years old. This picture was taken at my high school graduation party. And I was so excited to be going to college. It was, just kind of lining up. I'm going to be an English major because I love literature and stories, and this is going to be awesome. And I was so thrilled. But I also had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I knew I would be attending a prestigious undergraduate institution that will remain nameless. My imposter syndrome was sort of exacerbated by what I saw as a disconnect between my preparation as a student and the expectations of the institution. And so I share this picture of myself not simply because I'm a flaming narcissist, but because I think joy requires a little bit of vulnerability. So I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you all right now and talk about this journey because it's important that we all remember our 18-year-old selves. And I know that not all of our students are 18 years old, but many are. And so to kind of think about their perspective, where they're coming from, what their struggles might be. And despite, the smiling face, inside there was quite a bit of turmoil. So fast forward 4 years, and you can see, outwardly very exuberant. So now I'm a senior, and I am enthusiastic, still love literature, pretty joyful as a human, but I was still finding my voice. I was prone to self-doubt, as I think many of us perhaps still are, but certainly at 21 might be. And I was perhaps a little naive, meaning I was a student, right? That's kind of the definition of what it means to be a student, is to be naive. And so I was an English major, and despite my imposter syndrome, I was really successful as a student. So I qualified to be in the departmental honors program and write an honors thesis. I was like, oh, wow, awesome. And I'm an English major, and who is the figure of the canon of English literature? William Shakespeare. Right, Katie? And you can see my t-shirt. William Shakespeare. I was really intrigued by, the permutations of how love moves from the naive Romeo and Juliet to more sophisticated and nuanced and mature adult loves throughout the play. So I wanted to write about this. I thought it was really exciting. I just wanted a mentor. I had academic success, but large classes, largely not real friendly spaces at Berkeley. And so I wanted to have someone who could be kind of a guide for me. And so I was okay, I'm going to choose this person to be my guide. She will show me the way to be an academic. And this will be really inspiring and important for me. And it did not go well. Here she is. So, kind of imagine, this and this. This is the naive part, right? If you go onto the Wikipedia page for this figure, you will see she's a scholar, she's a critic, she's a professor. And so my experience, my baptism by fire into the life of a scholar, was forged in relationship with this person. And I tell this story not just woe is me, but we know that there's all this research out there about the difference that one person can make. All it takes is one professor who really believes in you, who gives you a sense of belonging, and that can just keep you in college and get you to the finish line and all this great stuff. And maybe all it takes is one person who gives you one look and says, ugh, to make you really doubt yourself as a scholar, as happened to me. She convinced me I had no place in academia. And if I could tell this space what I know now, things might have been different, but I did not know it then. I promise there are no more pictures of me, in part because I don't think my story is the important part here. My story is not unique. I knew this from talking to all of you, and also in reading Braiding Sweetgrass, when Robin Wald Kimmerer talks about her experiences with her botany professor, who just questioned, that's not an academic question, when she asked, why do asters and goldenrod so often grow together? And she says, I had no rejoinder. I had made a mistake. There was no fight in me, only embarrassment at my error. I did not have the words for resistance. The professor made me doubt where I came from, what I knew, and claimed the right way to think. Okay. All right, so let us fast forward 15 years. I go into teaching, and I realize that's really my calling. I love to teach. I love to talk to people about their teaching. What's happening in your classroom? What are you doing with your students? There's this whole discipline called education where you could study that stuff. I didn't have to, get a PhD in English literature. Wow, imagine that. Got into teaching. And I found myself in a classroom with a group of first-year students, and I asked them this icebreaker question. Describe your favorite past learning experience. I thought this was going to be just a cute little day one. Learning modalities. Are you a visual learner? Do you like to read your writing, role play? Like, what's your thing? You know, little did I know, this would change the trajectory of my life as a scholar. Because class of about 30 students, they all, wrote their little paragraphs and they told me about their favorite past learning experiences. And I started reading them and, yay, great. They talked about learning how to ride a horse, how to drive a car. Somebody wrote really beautifully about, like, I didn't have a great relationship with my older brother, but like the time when he taught me how to drive, it was just, it was this amazing bonding thing, all this great stuff. They wrote about how learning to play soccer was really powerful and a great learning experience. They talked about learning how to draw. They talked about learning how to bake cupcakes. What's missing? Anything having to do with school. So I went into this classroom and I said, hey, no judgment, but I am really curious why nothing about school is school, other than my senior honors thesis, was actually a happy place for me, teacher that I was. So I didn't like, what's going on? Like, why this? And I was, I'll never forget, I still remember his name, I still remember his face. He raised his hand and he said, Professor Camfield, school teaches us what we're bad at. And that went through me like a knife. And I decided, I need to go back and get my doctorate and understand more about this. I need to understand why, when we have acres of research about effective teaching practices, why so rarely does that get incorporated in our classrooms? What's happening here that this is the result? And so I just want to, talk a little bit. I promise we're going to turn a little bit to joy, because here's something we know about learning and joy. Mammals learn through play, right? They even enjoy playing with adult mammals. And, listen to y'all laughing. Joyful response, right? But in education, here's what we know. If you don't know PhD comics, you should get to know them. How do you see yourself? You are a complex human being. You have hopes, dreams, and aspirations. How most professors see you, brain on stick. So, how's research? And this is not a surprise, because we know that the culture of the academy, and again, my honors thesis advisor was a product of a system. She was a product of a culture. So I'm not trying to vilify her singly, although that single relationship that I had with her was detrimental to me. But we are all steeped in a culture that is hierarchical, that has scarce resources that we feel like are ever scarcer every minute, every year, right? It's fiercely then competitive because of that hierarchy and those scarce resources. We know that it's hyper individualistic, except maybe in the sciences where teams can get rewarded for their work. We know that it's often fear-based. Oh my gosh, I don't want to get caught by, not working on the weekend or whatever it might be. We know that ideas and our identities are often artificially curated in journal articles, at presentations, on our web pages, wherever it might be. We know that people feel time poor. There is never enough time. This sense of scarcity really is not just about the resources, the material resources, but it's about time. which leads us in the classroom to feel pressured for content coverage. We got to just scream through the material in order to, get to that finish line at the end of the semester before the baton passes to the next semester. So the culture of the academy is this. If this is shocking to anyone in this room, I will remind you that fish don't know they're wet, right? You're swimming in this all the time. This seems like normal. So when I talk about joy as a form of resistance, that's what I'm talking about. We need to resist this culture in higher education. And the place that I'm going to begin is in this word. We are obsessed with being rigorous, being perceived as rigorous. Some of you are smiling because I've had many conversations. You know that this word troubles me in part because we don't often have critical conversations about what we mean by rigor. Do we mean the harshness of a New England winter where you're trudging through the snow? Do we mean the rigor of trying to weight lift something that is maybe outmatching you? Or do we mean the stiff inflexibility of rigor mortis? I don't think any of these dispositions are what we want in our classrooms. And so I ask us to think about vigor instead of rigor. Rigor is life affirming. Rigor is inspiring. Vigor, lifts us up into the sunlight. And so we turn to joy, because I think joy and vigor are inextricably linked. And so where this book began for me was in the pandemic, also kind of a miserable time. And I did not yet have the concept of joy-centered pedagogy or even writing this book. That came later. But I did have a sense that things were not okay with our students. I knew that students were shell-shocked. I was reading all of this literature about students being disconnected and depressed and just, despondent, discouraged, all kinds of D words, right? This was so concerning. And so I thought, what can I do to, design a class that would be kind of an antidote to this experience that our students were going through? And it was probably the first time in my life that I designed a class that I wanted to have be an easy A. I didn't care whether it was rigorous or not. This was very liberating, and mind you, this was just a few years ago. First time in my long teaching career, like, okay, I'm going to design an easy A class. So the real course learning outcomes for the course that I came to design were intended. It was a class that I wanted students to feel connected, I wanted them to feel cheerful, and I wanted them to feel courageous. That was my goal. And a new course was born. And many of you have heard my story about this course, but it was a powerful hack. And I use the word hack intentionally because in computer parlance, it means kind of going in and rewriting the code. So I was rewriting the code of rhetoric. Usually starts with Cicero and the ancient Romans and all this terminology that's super alienating. And instead, I said, we're starting with stand-up comedy. And we're starting with what I hoped would be playful and silly and opportunities for us to laugh together and to try to make each other laugh. And all of the kind of cortisol buildup that we had in our brains from all the stress we were experiencing would maybe get a chance to dissipate a little in this presence together, playing together, just like those little meerkats that I showed a few screens ago. So I hacked into this genre, and hey, the art of trying to persuade other people to laugh sounds like rhetoric to me. And I knew that I would need new policies for this course. So I needed to have a labor-based grading approach. I needed to build a rubric together with my students. So it was flattening that hierarchy. They weren't afraid of my judgment. I was not the arbiter of their success. I knew that it required a different kind of daily practice. I wanted them to feel connection and community after all of that emergency remote instruction where they were disconnected. So come together, be in a writing group, pitch your jokes, help each other funny it up, right? Build that connection together. I came to grapple with the fact that I hated group work, but then I came to love it. But that's a whole other story about my unlearning. But I do have to just acknowledge that there were two sets of responses from colleagues when they learned that I was teaching this stand-up class. So on the one hand, there was the, can I be in your class? And have you heard this comedian? And make sure that you teach this comedian and all this excitement. And then there was the, holy smokes, no way, you're going to get canceled and fired, and students are going to be like recording you and posting it and taking it out of context, and it's just going to be a bloodbath and be awful. So I will say it now, that joy-centered pedagogy in the culture of the academy, and perhaps in the climate we're in right now, it can be a little risky. I assure you it's worth the risk, and you have to take some extra precautions, perhaps. And so I needed to kind of find my courage to, yes, I know there are risks here. I know students are going to be cursing, and they're going to be talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, because that's what stand-up's all about. And I needed to set up some discourse agreements in the class where we agreed on how we were going to speak with one another. I needed to lead with authenticity and my own vulnerability. I performed some of my own stand-up very badly. Students thought it was very charming. Yeah, nice try. And that was actually good, that I wasn't very good at it. But I plugged in there with them and said, oh, let's try this thing. It's kind of a weird genre. It required me to radically trust students, to just kind of lean into their humanity and recognizing hey, we're in this relationship together. I trust you. It did require some unlearning on my part. In particular, this really, the locus for this was me unpacking what student-centered meant. I came to really recognize that prior to teaching this class, my classes looked more like this. There was, bright lights and, exciting music, and, it was very, inviting, because I was an entertaining teacher. But the class still revolved around the center pillar of me and my control of the structure, my control of what we did each day, all of that. And so if you ask yourself, what does student-centered actually mean? It means let it go a little bit. And that was hard for me. Those of you who know me well, no, that's not. But this is what learning and student-centered learning should look like. It should be a joyride. Top down, destination unknown, somebody's at the wheel, and it ain't necessarily you. So there were some expectations that I had for the class, that we would be laughing, we would be building community, we would be connecting together, we would dispel some of the, fog of the pandemic. What I did not expect was the way students showed up for the class. In trusting them, they told me not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, my roommate is so weird, the food is so bad in the dining commons. They told me about experiences of abuse, addiction, self-harm, homophobia. The list goes on. And I was blown away with their trust and their readiness and willingness to go there. So when I talk about joy-centered pedagogy, this isn't just like kumbaya. This is this kind of deep core human connection where students show up as their full selves. It's really the promise of education, and particularly higher education, right? And I had been used to kind of high course evaluation scores. What I was unprepared for that first year was how many students just volunteered, like, yeah, I'll perform my stand-up publicly at the showcase and at the end of the semester in front of strangers. It's like, really? So here they are, ready to take the mic and talk about it all. And some of you were there. There they are at the end of the performance, where they gave me the most moving tribute I've ever received to my teaching. Unlooked for, and this is not like, oh, look how great I am. This is the power of joy-centered pedagogy. Not just that night, but the cards, the emails that I received from students after the class saying, thank you, oh my gosh, this made a difference in my life. A year later, a student saying to me, I didn't properly thank you at the time. I never realized how much healing I did through writing my jokes. I was no longer ashamed of things that had happened in my life. After displaying yourself in front of a crowd, it alters your personality. It stayed with me and made my life richer. We want that for all of our classes, right? That kind of response. So let's talk about joy. Those of you who know the Inside Out movies, you know the character Joy. And you know, as I go around talking to people about joy, they're like, oh, you mean toxic positivity, joy? And I say, no. Joy has a reputation as kind of fluffy, feel good, but I assure you, joy is tough stuff. It is a deeply embodied sense of uplift that is powerfully connected to a sense of personal agency and connection with others. So it achieves both of those things in the spaces where we invite it in. So let's talk a little bit more about why joy. So you have my definition of joy, and let me give you a couple of other people's comments about joy. We know that Ingrid Fettel-Lee tells us that joy is a propulsive force that creates unity, lets us reclaim our humanity, disrupts expectations, promotes resilience, ding, 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 that, you know, $100 word that we're all looking for, especially post-pandemic, and gives rise to hope. Bettina Love tells us joy is crucial for social change. Joy is crucial for teaching. Finding joy in the midst of pain and trauma is the fight to be fully human. Acknowledging joy is to make yourself aware of your humanity, creativity, self-determination, power, and ability to love abundantly. Mic drop, right? But if you're still feeling skeptical, joy, it's just an emotion. We're brains on sticks again, remember? Okay, let's talk about the brain just for a minute. I had a lot of fun doing this part of the research for the book. What we know is that joy allows for the possibility of limbic regulation. In other words, if you are noticing that students are showing up in the classroom dysregulating, right? They are all over the place. They are despondent, they are angry, they are, you know, unable to kind of center themselves, all of that. Their amygdalas, right? Their reptile, you know, lizard brain is just firing off, fight, flight, hide, right? When you can activate joy in your classroom, you can set up this resonance in the space where you can regulate together, not through emotional contagion of negative emotion, but positive emotion. You can start a different kind of loop happening. We know that joy creates serotonin, which disrupts cortisol. We know it releases dopamine, which rewires. This is Rick Hansen, you know, his quoting him from his, now I'm going to blank on the title of his book, but there you go. He talks about how it rewires the salience network from red to green. We know that joy produces oxytocin, which promotes bonding. We also know that joy allows for the activation of neurotransmitters associated with learning, attention, and memory. We know that it promotes mental flexibility and neuroplasticity. We know it is associated with intrinsic motivation, which is what we want. We want students not just motivated by the grade you're going to give them, but we want them to really be bought into the importance of learning whatever it is you're teaching. We want joy connects them with what is meaningful in their learning and therefore is connected to deeper learning. They're going to take it beyond your classroom. We also know that in the 21st century, there are all of these wicked problems. They are not cleanly linear issues with very simple solutions. We need students to be comfortable with something that's a little unbounded, that requires some creativity, where you just have to kind of throw some mud at the wall and maybe have fun doing it and see what sticks, right? So, what about the book? What do I do? How do I center joy intentionally in my classroom? And so this is where the lovely contributors, one of whom is in the room, Angela over there, come in. That they contributed chapters in which they talked about inviting joy or centering joy as an essential tool in their classrooms. And I want to just acknowledge that there is no single set of rules about how do I practice joy-centered pedagogy. It's like, invite joy in. It's context dependent. It is reliant on the individuals in your learning space. So I tell people, think about changing the context, not the content. I'll never forget a chemist who's just like, Boyle's law is Boyle's law. I can't change Boyle's law. So, the content is just fixed here for me. Maybe it wasn't a chemist. I may be masking identity there, but I kind of said, well, yeah, but you could have your students maybe discover Boyle's law or engage with a problem that necessitates using Boyle's law to find the solution. There are ways to make the context of your class, independent of your discipline, more joyful. So I will start by saying that. I will also give a tongue-in-cheek homage to Marie Kondo. You may remember from a few years ago, she had that show in the book about the art of tidying up. And she said, discard everything that does not spark joy. So I invite you to do an assessment of your courses and ask yourself, does my curriculum spark joy? How can I declutter? Meaning, am I just kind of unconsciously replicating teaching practices, reading quizzes, research papers, assignments that I had to endure as an undergraduate? I don't want to read them. Students don't want to write them. So what if we do something different? What if we repackage that same kind of cognitive lift, but in a project that is more engaging, more joyful? So how can you do this? The first thing I think is to just remember that joy is not just about your brain on a stick. Joy is an embodied experience. So to think about in your classrooms, how you might do some body scans or breathing exercises to just help center yourself and center your students, right? That cleansing breath, where maybe we can just, bring things down a notch in our activation. I invite you to asking your students to, think about how they can maybe move in the classroom. And so some people I see doing that where like they do polls, right? If you believe this, go over here. If you believe that, go over there. Get out of your seats, move around, draw, anything that kind of gets the body going. And there are chapters in the book for all of these ideas. Simply helping students identify their emotions. especially in this time of dysregulation, students may be experiencing, 15 different feelings, right? I'm loving and I'm angry, and I'm this and I'm that. And so just helping students like, okay, this is where I am today. This is really loud in my emotional room right now. This one seems to be the hardest. When I have conversations with faculty, they're like, whoa, now you want me to model self-care? I can just like write a little prescription for students. It's like, no, just as that radical trust and authenticity yields kind of some amazing results. If you can actually show your students, like, I'm not going to respond to email over the weekend or after 5 p.m. or whatever it might be, modeling how you are finding balance in your life. The other thing to think about, and so I have 3 slides because, I love alliteration, so I have like C words here, So this is joy and curiosity. If and when you read the book, you'll see that we have a number of chapters that are talking about curiosity and joy being linked. And so if you want to create occasions for joy to come into your classroom, think about ways that you can infect your students with curiosity. That may be sharing your sense of awe and wonder that drew you into your discipline in the first place, right? What got you started? What uplifted you? Why? Talk to your students about it. Activate playful discovery. Come up with scenarios that may seem goofy or silly, but raise questions that are important. You may want to think about ways of disrupting imposter syndrome through course-based research experiences and discovery-based learning. This chapter surprised me, and when it came, it kind of surprised the author actually as well. She's a biology professor, and she reflected on her time as an undergraduate, first-gen female person, and how being in lecture or taking exams, she was excruciatingly self-conscious of, I don't belong here. But when she dove into research, she lost her sense of self and just dove in and swam in the waters of inquiry and discussion about what was discovered. And her imposter syndrome really blunted, again, chapter in the book. Think about ways of mitigating the pain of failure in your class. Labor-based grading may not be your thing, but you might want to think about, lots of little assignments or whatever it might be, just talking to your students about failure as an opportunity for growth, all of that stuff, right? Mitigating the pain of failure. And a couple of our chapters talk about this, starting with a safer other activity. I think too often we sort of dive into topics that are threatening to our students. It may be that it's a really complex mathematical or scientific concept and students are like, wow, that sounds really hard, I'm going to shut down. But it also could be race, class, gender stuff where it's like, oh my goodness, there are going to be a lot of fights about this, I'm going to shut down. So if you can think about a way to come into those sorts of topics a little tiny bite at a time, it allows for that opening, that curiosity for the students. Another frame, and you can see these things are obviously related, but we have observed that joy and creativity seem to be really linked. And so there's a beautiful chapter in the book where 2 colleagues talk about using arts-based pedagogy, both in faculty development and in their classrooms. So collage, role playing, mapping activities, all of that kind of stuff, which feel, it's like, okay, it feels like kindergarten art time, and it's joyful and it's powerful. Hacking genres, I already talked about that with stand-up comedy class. So to think about like, what are the expectations or what are the norms of my discipline that I could maybe disrupt and reframe to just be kind of more user-friendly for students. Sometimes this can be counterintuitive. You have to be comfortable being creative as an educator. And I will allow Angela to talk about this more in the Q&A time if you want to know more about it, because this is actually her chapter, where talking about creating periods of silence in your classroom can lead to more impassioned and joyful and exciting participation from more students. And so when you activate this creativity, you will see that students develop more agency and more sense of their authentic voice. And these are the life skills that we want our, we don't want them to just parrot us out in the world. We want them to be their own agents, their own persons. I think about Paul Hanstedt's flip on the word authority rather than meaning authority, but more authorship, right? You get to write, you get to have the authority to write your story. Finally, this came through so powerfully in so many chapters in the book, joy and connection. So strategies for creating community, and some people say, oh, you mean like through icebreakers, making it sound like those are kind of like optional, silly little activities. And I'm just like, well, I hope there's not much ice in your classroom, but maybe you're trying to keep rigor mortis, course cold. I don't know. I think you need to build classroom community from day one and draw that through the entire semester. It requires really seeing your students at the very least doing your best to learn names. And if you have a really large class, to at least still say, and remind me what your name is, even if you don't, Mari, I know your name. Or just check-ins, right? Naming your emotions, right? What's going on? How many people are in quadrant 4 today? Just that kind of thing to show that you're showing up as a human. Collaborative work as opposed to group work, right? Group work students hate. Group work, I was just talking about this in my class yesterday. Group work, it's like, well, I'm an industrious student. I could just do this by myself and have more fun doing it and do it more efficiently by myself. Truly collaborative work is when the outcome is really unknown. And that you need to have the contributions of all of the diverse voices and perspectives in the space to get you somewhere that you never imagined before. Joy. Joy can come from bearing witness. We have a really powerful chapter in the book from a political science professor who talks about I study white supremacy and sexual violence. We talk about unjoyful topics in my class. But bearing witness, telling the stories, brings a joy forward. Ross Gay, who has a beautiful collection of essays called Inciting Joy, talks about sometimes we just need to invite sorrow, come in and sit at the table with us, and sharing a meal together with sorrow, that's joy. So I think about that as the power of bearing witness together to all of the nonsense that's happening in the world that, it's real. I'm not trying to negate that, right? But bearing witness together, powerful. Struggling together, powerful chapter in the book about learning computer coding. And the author talks about trying to learn that alone as an undergraduate and having to drop out of not just the class, but the major. Because she's like, there's no place for me in computer science. I'm going to go major in something else. But then her experiments now as an educator with let's struggle together. Let's form a team where we're going to work on these problems and identify exactly what the source of the problem is and, figure it out together. So this is a slide, actually. Not just that AI is a new thing, but more as I've been talking about this book with people. It was about 2 weeks ago, I was talking with someone about it, and I really thought about this question that is so pressing for us as educators right now, right? What can we offer in our classrooms that AI can't, right? Click of a button, you've got your essay, right? Click of a button, you've got your discussion questions, right? It's so easy. So what can we offer in our classrooms that AI can't? Joy gives us the answer. Joy can do 2 things that AI can't. Joy can give us a sense of sanctuary. a sense of haven from a heartless world. And sanctuary is not important just in our classroom, but the capacity to make a sanctuary, because our students' lives are curated on social media all the time. All the time. So if you're constantly wondering about how's this going to float on Instagram, you don't have a sense of sanctuary. You don't have a sense of retreat, safety, breathing. So we teach our students with joy, about joy. They have the capacity to make sanctuaries in their lives, and importantly, with other humans or without other humans. But solidarity. AI can't do that for us. That takes real, authentic, vulnerable, meaningful connection with other human beings. And so, in the end, here's the book. There is the QR code. It will take you to the Routledge site. You will see I am not here to try to sell books. This is thank you to UC Merced and a research grant that Emily Johnson and I received. We were able to get an open access license for the book, so you can download it electronically and read it for free. That's okay too, but you don't have to. And I do just want to point out there's something a little bit different about our book, because a lot of times these sorts of teaching guides tell you how to, right? It tells you like, this is what you should do in your classroom. Here's the lesson plan. There's a little bit of that. The appendix is full of teaching tips. Every chapter is kind of showcasing, here's what I did in my classroom. But what I think is powerful and uplifting about the book, and what has made it such a joy and an honor to edit, is the fact that the authors are these educators who have just vulnerably told their stories. You will see them. They talk about, like, I dropped out of college the first time. I was a first-gen student. Many of them were first-gen students. Several of them talk about imposter syndrome. And they talk about how centering joy not just was good for them, students, but powerfully affected themselves as educators. The last 3 chapters are specifically addressing faculty burnout and how joy was a way of assuaging that sense of burnout. So that's what I got for you today, folks. Thanks for listening. It looks like we have about 10 for questions, and or, anything. Obviously, as I mentioned, Angela is here too, so I may invite her in to talk about the process of putting the book together. But anything that, comments that you'd like to make or questions that you have to ask. I'm here. Yeah.
I just have a comment. Just thank you so much. I mean, you've given us both a how to and a why to, and a way that I often call, like, and this happens in the Shakespeare world a lot, like Everest-based pedagogy, where it's like there might be ways up, but like you conquer this thing and like you do it on your own, right? And this is the absolute opposite of that. I've just been asked to write a pedagogy essay, and I'm just going to make it about joy-centered Shakespeare. So, giving, all of this is good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Was there any initial pushback on the idea of joy-centered pedagogy, especially since it's not as measurable as other?
No. And in fact, when I drop this on people, they're like, oh my God, do we need that? Which has been such a surprise. So I loaded up on the brain stuff because I thought I was gonna have to whack the positivists in the room in this shape and say it matters. I have not. I've had one person, interestingly, so I kind of gave a version of this talk recently. And afterwards, somebody said, well, I was worried it was going to be toxic positivity. And if it was, I was going to leave. But it wasn't, so I stayed. I'm just like, well, I'm glad to stay. And so I think people are more worried that there's going to be this kind of fake, just put on a smile and pretend everything is fine. And I would say actually toxic positivity is the opposite of joy-centered pedagogy. Joy-centered pedagogy means you show up in all the raw and in all the ugly. And that makes you approachable. And that builds that authentic relationship with students. And so not yet, I'm waiting to get that pushback. And definitely the chapter about from the political scientist about like bearing witness. She actually acknowledges that being prepared for a campus assessment coordinator to be like, well, how do you measure joy? And how do you design a control group and this and that? Thus far, maybe they just haven't found us out yet.
But you're not there to measure joy.
Yeah.
That's not, the joy is the condition for learning. And if it's a condition for learning, your students will learn more.
I believe that.
Yeah.
But I think
The pass rates of joy-centered pedagogy classes.
Yeah.
that's the problem. Is grading gets in the way of a lot.
Yeah.
He talks about collaborative learning, and you have to change the conditions. Well, when students say group work, it's like I can get an A without the freeloaders. If the way to make them collaborate is that they have to solve a problem that there is no obvious answer to, you have to grade differently. That is where I think you're going to get a lot of pushback. Assess it.
And
How do you measure learning?
yeah, and I'm forearmed for that.
I just wanted to add Jackie Shea, who is one of the contributors of the chapter and has an outside background, many of you know her. She has actually been testing and piloting a survey that she's developed to help quantify the joy, just for that kind of a question about, well, how do we measure joy? And so she has been piloting a survey for students to rate themselves in terms of joy. And so it will be interesting to see. She's working with large numbers of students, so it'll be interesting to see the results.
Okay, I'm gonna enjoy this moment because Angela was in my class last year, and I kept calling her Angela because I kept saying, my friend Angela, and then I would slip and call you Angela. It was a very I had to walk that line. So I apologize the times I screwed up for both of you, but Angela, tell me what you'd like to say.
I just wanted to comment on I didn't see you mentioning culture, but it's implied everywhere, especially starting from Kimber's quote. But for me, the need to be able to utilize my knowledge that I already come to that space with is embraced in joy.
Yeah.
So when we think about measuring this, I feel like the traditional form of measurement needs to be expanded to be able to include that concept in this one way of learning that we do our testing based on. In opening up the classroom space to joy, students are able to learn more based on where they're starting at.
Yep.
And in those testing scores, you're going to see that number rise for that alone.
Yeah.
And so a way to be able to measure that, I feel like, is more the question than using what we already know.
Yeah. And that joy is, equal access to, we all have equal access to joy. Joy is asset focused, just definitionally.
I can be me. And
Yeah.
no one comes into this space not wanting to be successful. So when we say, why aren't the students reading? Why aren't they doing this? We're asking the wrong questions. And a lot of times we tend to talk like it's your fault, but we need to leave that out and say, it's not my fault, but things have changed. We know things change. So why here and now are we ignoring that also, as other people have done to us in the past, but instead embracing where we are now? And these people are here, and we're talking about wanting to include people. And so we have to expand our own thought in that, in bringing that joy in and letting people be who they are.
Yeah.
Because when you let someone be who they are, they're going to always bring you gifts because you're open to receiving the gift.
Yeah.
If you tell them no, I was thinking about kids and crayons. When you're talking earlier about mud on the wall, I immediately saw, babies with crayons writing on walls and moms freaking out and boxing them up right away.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when you do that?
Yeah.
Then you get nothing.
And creativity is.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point about culture, let's remember that, and again, when you're reading the book, you'll see, in the introduction, I praise and lift, Audre Lorde, kind of just talking about there's got to be pleasure, in our activism. And I know that's Adrienne Marie Brown, but they're linked, right? And, Bettina Love talking about Black joy and the necessity of, we gotta have joy or this revolution ain't gonna be sustained, right? We're not gonna get off the ground if it's always a slog and it's always a misery. And it's interesting. So, as I said, I gave a version of this talk at Nevada State last week, and it's in the middle of the desert, these really dry hills. And somebody was saying, well, like, how can we find joy in these terrible times, right? Things are so uncertain right now. Things are just so rough. Like, what can we do? And I looked out at those hills and I said, well, maybe joy is like water. And we can't move a mountain, right? But we can find the little trickle of joy, and we can follow that thread of joy down the mountain, and maybe we find a ravine, and maybe there's some green there. Maybe there's some respite. Maybe there's an oasis where we can come together in joy. And that allows us to maybe go back out, into the wilderness. I'm sounding very biblical, I realize. So, I think that, again, that joy is not negating the rough terrain that we sometimes have to walk with our colleagues, departments, at our institutions, in our nations, on our planet. I mean, there's plenty of misery going around. But finding your trickle of joy, maybe what sustains you. Krista.
Great talk. Thank you so much. I was thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the fact that so many students in California come to classrooms with a high average childhood experiences score. About 60-something% of the population has a score of 0 or 1. And anybody with a score greater than 3 grew up in what is called toxic stress. So when you're talking about the red alert to green, so a student comes to a classroom, 2/3 of the class will be fine. They're not triggered as a natural state. They're not on red alert. And then some of the students in the last third will perceive the whole world as quite dangerous, right? And just as a corollary and observation, 2 of my most serious, rigorous, even vigorous scholars have been students who, to my understanding, have all of their Maslow's hierarchy of needs very well met consistently across their lives. For them, scholarship is joy. They don't have anything external interrupting their ability to be completely present in the scholarship. And so I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts about how because trauma is a way of talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and ACE scores and PTSD as well, but how do you sort of navigate that space in class of students having different levels of readiness and different levels of ability to self-actualize as part of the process of joyful engagement?
God, great stats, thank you, and great question. I'm going to separate out academic readiness from emotional readiness.
Sure.
Because I see those as really different things, and I also, Angela, was thinking about your comment when Krista was speaking. So let's talk about the emotional readiness, for a second. And those differential levels of preparation. Now, see, I'm like, I did that call out and I'm kind of forgetting what I was wanting to even say about it. Sorry, distracted. Finish your question out one more time, Krista.
Academic versus emotional readiness to be in the classroom and engage in a joyful way. If I
Yeah, and that's why I think like joy is this like equal opportunity activator of learning. That if you can, start with, as many of you know, my alligator river scenario, which is just such a silly little story that everybody, you don't have to have advanced reading skills. You don't have to, and it's so non-threatening, but it gives you the opportunity to kind of practice discourse with others. I do think being transparent and talking about like the realities of what it means to be kind of at that threat level and talking about how you can practice self-calming. It's a little bit like universal design. right? Where, universal design, we talk about that as people with accessibility needs. And I think what you're describing is a form of an accessibility need, right? And so if we can see joy as universally inviting, then, maybe that's our way in.
I just want to follow because Eileen really addresses the crossover with trauma-informed pedagogy and then also the differentiation between joy-based and trauma-informed in her intro of the book. So she goes into great lengths talking about it. So if you're able to give the intro a read, I think there'll be a lot of clarity around that question.
That's what I was forgetting to say, which was that, and I'll be honest, like at the beginning, I approached this book and I realized we're out of time, but I approached the book as I'm not sure about trauma-informed pedagogy. I feel like it keeps students in the orbit of their trauma. I really wanted students to kind of move beyond to find a place of healing or self-healing and all of that. And then I came to realize, my good training in the academy, I'm going to take on, I'm challenging. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm building upon. And so trauma-informed pedagogy asks us to say, what happened to you? Why this response? What happened to you? And that's an important question to ask. But joy-centered pedagogy asks, what uplifts and inspires you? And that's also an important question to ask. And takes you out of that in some ways. Anyway, thank you. That is what I was wanting to say. It looks like the book drawing is at hand.
We can do the book drawing. We also there are little magnet buttons. So those came in a little bit late. If anybody wants to pick those up, I think one of your students.
Yeah. So go new, who came a little late and left a little early. But one of my students took quotes from the book and made buttons for y'all. So some of them are magnets and some of them are buttons. So please help yourself. And there are these stickers here as well. Enjoy them.
Do you want